Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. We're going to talk today about a lecture called The Psychological Self. I'm going to try and share that now. Share. Hopefully you can see something. Begin the talk. So today we're going to talk about the psychological self. And um, already in the past three lectures, we've talked about the way in which our psychology in terms of trying to understand it in this particular session or group of classes, we're breaking the psychology down into different components to try and understand how they interrelate within our psyche and how we operate as human beings. And generally, we have said previously that the human, for most people, most of the time, the human finds themselves or himself or herself psychologically asleep. And the purpose of this course, or one of the purposes, is to enable the student of Gnosis, to find methods and techniques which they can use to enable them to psychologically wake up and then to go on from that moment when they wake up to discover their own gnosis, their own direct, objective, personal truth about any situation, event, or moment. So let's talk about this in a bit more detail. If you remember in previous talks, we've said that the psychology generally can be broken down or deconstructed, as it were, into these fundamental elements: personality, free essence, and egos. So in our psychology itself, we have these uh, aspects called essence and ego. Essence, or another name for consciousness, is split into two main areas. The first is the fact, if you remember from previous lectures, that the majority of our consciousness or free essence, or excuse me, our essence is trapped within egos, and egos are represented there by those cloudy things. And the trapped essence correspondingly is shown in the yellow blobs inside the clouds. And you can also see there free essence or free consciousness. And that consciousness, that essence, is um, generally for most people overwhelmed most of the time because we are preoccupied with all those egoic aspects manifesting through our psyche as we go through our daily life. So the free essence is generally psychologically overwhelmed or asleep, we can say. And what we're trying to do now is talk about methods to enable us to awaken that consciousness, to awaken that free essence so that we can start to discover more and understand more about how our psychology works, with the view then to begin to change our psychology if we so choose. And then around all of that, we have the personality. And again, that was discussed in a previous lecture. The personality is an energetic aspect which we carry with us. It's developed in the first 7 or so years of our life to do with our language, our culture, our family, our siblings, our school, our way in which we live our life generally in the first 7 years of our life. And then it modifies and changes and adapts as we go through different events in our life. You know, if we become a student or if you become a teacher or a parent or whatever we do, our personality modifies, and the personality can be used by either the essence or the ego, egos plural. So when we are psychologically asleep, the egos manifest through the personality like a vehicle. The personality becomes a vehicle of expression for those egos. So if we have an ego of anger or an ego of pride or lust or whatever it is, then it will manifest through our personality. And that's kind of like logical. but also something we discussed last week is quite profound. And then on the other side, we can see that if the essence is in charge of our psychology in any moment, in other words, if it is awake, that free essence you can see in with the smiley face, if that becomes um, active, then the essence is able to drive the vehicle of the personality. And rather than somebody be reactive, instead they are assertive. And depending on the situation, the aspects of anger or pride or lust do not manifest because they are egoic. Instead, compassion, serenity, humbleness, for etc., those aspects may well manifest. And when we talk about those aspects, we're talking about the generally the details of those aspects, the tiny aspects or parts that may manifest of any particular moment in our life. So let's talk about this psychological self. We know we have essence within us, and it's shown here with the top diagram as something related with the heart, something to do with consciousness, which is therefore something not in our mind. It is beyond the mind. And normally in everyday language, people tend to say, well, I changed my mind about that. Well, if that's the case, we are not the mind. We change the mind. So the mind is just an operating tool, if you will, for, as we just described, essence or ego. But you can see underneath that, the I, that's supposed to be a representation of the essence being awake psychologically. It's just something I found on the internet. But at the same time, we have these egos within us. And it could be like, why is it my turn to wash up again? You know, the resentfulness or the hard done by, all the self-pity. Why is it always me? Why always is it me? I have to do all these things and no one else does them. All those aspects of or details we could say of, in this example, pride. Or it could be something to do with, as an example, anger. Someone could be really angry about something, and it's for everybody else, it's just nothing. It doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but that person may feel any particular situation of daily life very, very irritating or very, very frustrating, and they get really angry. So we have these two uh, aspects of our psychology manifesting all the time. On the one side, the egos manifest for the majority of our daily life, but the essence from time to time does manifest in those rare moments. We feel that lucidity. We feel everything is clear, everything is right. Athletes call it the purple patch, you could say. That's an old, maybe you don't recognize that, but that's an old statement. But the point is that these two aspects exist within us, inside our psychology. And if we start to break this down again and look at where we are from day to day, we can see that the free consciousness is what is separated from the trapped consciousness within the egos. And this bottle, you can see on the bottom left of the image, is supposed to be a representation of essence trapped inside the ego or the bottle. And what we need to do, the students of Gnosis, is once we understand the ego and then fully comprehend the ego, then we can smash the bottle, release the essence that's trapped inside, and it can coalesce or grow with the already free essence. So you can see that there is some kind of psychological process which we can follow to enable us to increase free essence, free consciousness, and decrease the amount of egos inside our psychology. And we also know on the other side of the coin on the right, you can see the way in which any particular ego, so those clouds again, any particular ego can manifest through our thoughts, feelings, as in emotions, or actions. So when we talk about actions, we're talking about anything related with the motor center, anything to do, movement, anything to do with instinctive things, whether we whether we're breathing quickly or slowly is all very instinctive, but it also could be very ego related. And then anything to do with the sex. Okay, so the gonads, the sex, anything there is relate what we would clump together those three things to call actions. So we have thoughts, feelings, as in emotions, not touching, and uh, actions. Those three things manifest or are what the ego uses to manifest through. Hold on, my button's gone. Okay, so it's at that point when the ego is manifesting through the thoughts, feelings, or actions that two things occur, as you can see, identification and then subsequently fascination. These are terms used to describe the psychological processes of the way in which the ego actually begins to manifest through each one of us in every moment. So, identification is where the ego throws out, you could say, little hooks into the mind to give us something to begin to think about or doubt or consider or reason in any moment. And then the fascination is where the ego manifests completely through our thoughts and feelings and actions. And in that moment, we become that ego. That ego is then manifesting and controls the human machine. We can say the human machine totally. So an example might be when somebody is going shopping and they're going through the high street and they have one purpose. All they need to do is buy some oranges. It's just an example. So they're going to buy some oranges. And as they walk down the high street, the person goes by the jeweler's and looks through the window, just glances at the window. And in the window, there is a ring. Oh, what a lovely ring. Look at that lovely ring. That's a fantastic ring. That is identification. In that moment, the ego of um, the ego related to the ring, you could say. So that could be desiring the ring, wanting the ring, or it could be that the person used to be a jeweler and looks at how it was constructed and how the ring was made previously, or it could be that the person is just jealous of people who wear jewelry, or it could, many different reasons why any particular ego may identify with that particular ring in the window. But in this moment, the ego is beginning to send out, you could say, these little hooks into the thoughts of the person who's going shopping for oranges. They're not going to look at rings, but now they are identified with this ring. Okay. And then in that same moment, the ego begins to manifest through the feelings and the actions. So it could be, oh, that's a beautiful ring. I really could do with that ring. Oh, if only I had a ring like that. That's an amazing ring. Look how beautiful it is. Oh, could I afford that? Do I have the money for that? All the emotions and the emotional thinking that goes with the identification builds, and then eventually the actions. Oh, I need to go in the shop. I need to go and look at this ring. I need to try the ring on. I wonder if they can size it down or size it up to fit my fingers. And I wonder if I can go to the cash till to get the money out. We become completely fascinated with the ring or any other situation. We are completely mechanically controlled by that particular ego. And so much so, we forget ourselves. We forget our purpose. So in this case, going to get the oranges is now forgotten about. All we need to do is go and see the ring. We need to feel the ring, touch the ring. We need to feel the weight of the ring. We need to go and find out how many carats are in the ring. And all this stuff is where we have become identified and then fascinated with that ring, as an example. Okay. So that means we have no permanent center of conscience. It's very difficult. This is for most of the people, most of the time, to have one purpose. Even just like in the example, going to get oranges, we can get diverted away from anything in any moment purely by the manifestation of any particular ego through our thoughts and feelings and actions. Okay? So that means we can say very coldly, I suppose, that we are puppets. We are marionettes because we react to the events in which we find ourselves. We find ourselves walking down the high street, we see the ring, and we react to what the impression of the ring is through our eyes. Okay. Excuse me. We often become, the Gnostic masters say, victims of circumstance. We think we're in control of our life, and yet a thing like this can make us completely deviate from the purpose of whatever we were doing. We are not focused on one thing. We have no center of conscience or consciousness. Okay. So if I say to you, can you think of the sound of the dentist drill? And even just saying that, we imagine the sound now, and we got the feeling of, oh, the dentist, oh, the drilling my teeth, oh, all the reactions we have to the dentist, or the thought of going to the dentist to have a filling. So that's the way we operate as humans. So this manner of behaving is the sleepiness of the consciousness and is the result of this process which we just described. First of all, the identification comes. Okay, so in this case, you can see the example. This guy in the schoolroom, he's looking out the window, or he's totally not even sure if he's looking out the window, but he's definitely in another place. Maybe he's daydreaming. But we can be identified through a person. We can be identified with or through an object. Okay. Oh, look at that ring. Look at that ring. Isn't it wonderful? We identify with it. Or it could be a situation. We see two people aggressively arguing in the precinct. How do we feel? How do we react? What do we do? Do we just walk on by and ignore it? Or do we stand and watch and take social media images of it? Or do we try and stop the fight that's occurring? What do we do? Well, each thing we do would, if we're identified with it, we will be reacting accordingly. And we could even be identified with an idea. So it's a great idea. Certain political issues, they're great ideas. Certain, even recycling issues, great ideas, but we can get identified through that. We forget ourselves. And then this fascination comes where the ego or the corresponding ego, which is reacting to what is happening in the events outside, okay, it manifests totally through our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. And so therefore, we become the ego. It is completely manifesting through us, and hence we're daydreaming. This guy, maybe he's thinking about I don't know, riding his motorbike, or maybe he's thinking about the World Cup. Who knows? But either way, he's daydreaming. He's not in the class. He's in the class, but psychologically, he's not in the class. He is psychologically asleep. And he has therefore forgotten himself. And that's where we are. Most of humanity, most of the time, forgets ourselves. We forget who we are, what we're doing, why we're there. Even though we may consider that we do know what we're doing, he may say, yeah, I'm in the classroom, I'm at school, I'm reading this book and I'm listening to the teacher. But the reality is something different. When we start to look at ourselves, when we start to examine ourselves, we start to see that it is not the case that we are in control. It is the case that we are marionettes, puppets. We are reacting to the events which happen during our life, in our daily life, in the external world. It could even be in the internal world. If we feel sick, if we feel unwell, we might react in a certain way. Oh, tablets. Oh, I need to sit down. all different ways of reacting, even to an internal thing as well. So we can look at this in a bit more detail. Just move that there. Okay. So you can see on the left, we have our free essence or consciousness, the smiley face. Okay. And on the right, we have the egos, and we have one of those egos manifesting through the thoughts and feelings and actions in any particular moment. And the essence we have on the left-hand side of the image, you can see we need to activate that consciousness. We need to become the observer. Okay, so we, the free essence, we, not our mind, we are going to observe what is going on inside our psychology. In other words, we're going to be observing that which is observed. Okay, so we are splitting ourselves psychologically, technically, in two, although actually it's we just look at ourselves, use the consciousness we have, the free consciousness, activate it, which we'll come on to in a moment, and then just take a look at our psychology, see how we are um, reacting to all the things in our daily life. And you can reconfigure this to look like this. So on the right hand side, we have the events coming in the green arrows, and those events come in. And then any particular ego you can see on the right hand side of the psychology is going to react through the thoughts and the feelings and the actions, the TFA. And at the same time, we, the free consciousness, the essence, okay, if you remember from last week, the essence is that divine part within us, permanently connected, hopefully through ubication. You remember that practice? So the observer is free essence or active consciousness looking at the rest of our psychology as it reacts to the events of life as we go through our daily life. Okay, so that's the general idea, and you can see that the identification and fascination happens on the right hand side of the image. It happens when the egos manifest in as a reaction to any event. So we see the woman with the red hat on the other side of the road, and immediately we are identified with the fact that she's got a red hat. Oh, she should be wearing that at Ascot. Or maybe we think, oh, that's a really nice red hat. Or we could say, oh, it's an awful. How can she wear that? What's she doing? And with those three sorts of comments within inside ourselves in our thoughts, we are identified. And then if we follow up and we think, oh, I need to get a hat like that, I'm going to go to the nearest shop and buy a hat just like that. We are fascinated. We have just become completely psychologically asleep. But we can observe those egos manifesting as thoughts and feelings and actions. And in that moment, when we observe them, they recede, they kind of hide, you could say, in our psychological landscape. They no longer continue to manifest directly because we have observed them. So if we are consciously active in this practice, the observer and the observed, then we're able to see the egos manifest as we go through our daily life. And we can see that over time, we will be able to observe that there are egos related to lust, pride, anger, laziness, greed, gluttony, envy, etc. And all that was the big seven, the seven deadly sins, but also treason, burglary, sarcasm, irony, all those different aspects of egos exist within us. And the more we observe, the more we see. Normally in our daily life, say, for example, the ego of pride, we do not get into a situation where the whole of the ego of pride will manifest in any moment. Instead, what happens with any ego, but we're taking pride as an example, we get to see the details. We could say the very small aspects related to pride manifesting. So when we go into the post office to the queue and we need to buy some stamps, and the person in front of us, well, they just push in, or the person in front of us can't find the money in the bag to pay for whatever they're buying, we get frustrated. And then we think, how dare they? This is wasting my lunch break. We got anger, we've got frustration, we have pride related to that, obviously. So it's only the details, but in each of those details, we can see all of the uh, different types of egos manifesting as we go through our day. And we can come to the conclusion quite quickly through this practice of the observer and the observed that each one of us has a main characteristic kind of group of egos who generally define who we are as a person. In other words, they're the ones that manifest the most through our false personality. So a sergeant major from the army behaves in a certain way and it has a certain group of egos that manifest the most. That would be his characteristic egos. Similarly, a lady who is a doctor, she will have a set of characteristic egos, the ones that manifest the most through that person. Or it could be a nun. She's going to have a different set of characteristic egos. Or uh, a person who is a swimmer, who is a competitive professional swimmer, they have another set of characteristic egos. All of us as a humanity have more or less all the same egos within. It's just that we have particular characteristic ones that manifest the most during our daily life based on what we do and our false personality. And that brings us to the point that actually we have many contradictions within us because each one of these egos is trying to be in charge in any moment. So the one who's very angry reacting to the situation over there is the same or is displaced by another ego very quickly when we feel hungry and we need to go and get some chocolate biscuits. And if we do the chocolate biscuits thing, we get another thing about the guilt. And then if we get guilty, we get um, uh, sort of the feeling of being hard done by. Why is it always me? So there's a whole chain reaction that occurs just because we decided to eat the chocolate biscuit. So that is where we're starting to examine ourselves. This is where we're starting to find the truth about ourselves and begin to give us our own gnosis. And when we have our own gnosis, then we can start to change, if we want to, change our psychology for the better. Okay. So these egos we talked about just now are also known in ancient Egypt as the red demons of Seth. You may well have heard of them. You may well have heard of the term used in the Christian churches, which is to do the word sin. Any sin is another word for ego. They're just examples. Okay, so practices and tools to activate our free consciousness so that we can understand. Okay, so we've said that we need to activate the free consciousness so that we can observe the ego manifesting to separate ourselves to be the observer and the observed. But how do we actually activate? How do we turn that light on within? How do we use all the tools and techniques which are going to be given in this course? Self-remembrance is the first method or the first tool or practice. How do we self-remembrance or self-remember? We've already said that if we are identified in any moment and then we become fascinated, we forget ourselves. So we're going to try and remember ourselves again in any moment. So we ask the question to ourselves internally. You don't have to say it aloud. Where am I? Literally, where am I? Really ask the question like with sincerity. What am I doing here? What am I doing here? Okay. Self-remembrance. It sounds very obvious. It sounds very straightforward, but to apply that practice is actually quite difficult, and we need to practice the practice. Okay. Second one is called the key soul or soul key, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Um, it's a method by which we are able to activate the consciousness. In other words, it enables us to remember ourselves as per the previous practice, so it's very related. But we need to ask ourselves three questions. And obviously, we begin by asking the questions with the intellect involved, but after a while, we're able to ask these same questions with the consciousness. So once you get into the practice of asking these questions about ourselves, then after a time, it just becomes natural. We don't have to think about it. We just feel the questions. They're difficult to describe, but I think with practice, you'll know what I mean. So the first thing is subject. Who am I in this moment? What are my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, my behaviors, my habits? How am I standing? Where am I sitting? What am I doing? In terms of who I am. Am I having an argument? Why am I having an argument? Who am I in this moment? Subject. Excuse me. Then we have object. So in that, we're saying, what am I doing? It's what is coming in to my mind through my five senses. What is coming into my mind through my five senses? What am I doing? What am I in this moment? Okay. We need to ask ourselves these questions. And then finally, location. Where am I? So where am I? Yeah, well, I'm in the middle of the high street. I'm in town. Oh yeah, I'm at my mother's house. That's great, but we need to go a bit deeper. Where am I? In this moment, am I in my heart? Am I in my head? Am I identified with any particular ego? Or am I with my essence, liberated, free, conscious? What's going on? Where am I? And so those three questions in combination help us to remember ourselves, help us to awaken the consciousness, that free consciousness we mentioned earlier, which is generally overwhelmed. We are going to awaken that with this practiced key soul or the soul key. And you can see the first one relates to it very simply as well. Self-remembrance, where am I? What am I doing? Well, that's two of the points in the key soul, but they all relate. Need to practice these. And then finally, the observer and the observed. We've already touched on this. There was that diagram earlier. We need to observe ourselves, but this is not just about observing the movements of our body. The vigilance of oneself involves the silence and serene study of all of our intimate psychological processes, emotions, thoughts, passions, words, reactions. So in other words, the free essence, the free consciousness is going to study, analyze, but precisely watch the egos manifest. That's all we need to do. Watch the egos manifest. It's like shining one of those searchlights they have in all the military films. They shine them at night, or in the prison where they shine the big light down onto all the people who are running away. That's what we're trying to do. Shine the light of the consciousness onto the egos as they manifest. So we can start to understand and comprehend those emotions, thoughts, passions, words, reactions, etc., etc. Okay, so one thing to say is that if we awaken our consciousness during the day with these practices we've just talked about, we can also awaken our consciousness when we are physically asleep. And this would lead us to, as you can see, astral projection. So astral projection is also known as, lucid dreaming, out of body experiences, all these things. But technically, astral projection is when we are more in control with the our journeys in the dream world, we could say. And each one of us, when we sleep, our psychology as a whole, that's the egos and the essence, enters into the fifth dimension or the astral world. And when we are identified, we get the very unusual, complicated or strange dreams, the purple dog or the feeling of falling. We don't understand why, all that stuff. That's because we are the egos within our psyche are with us in the astral world, and they are manifesting like they do in the daytime when we're uh, uh, psychologically awake normally. And so what this means is that if we are able to control and have our essence, our consciousness awake when we are in the sleep, the state, in other words, when the physical body is sleeping, if we're able to have our consciousness active in those moments, then we will begin to take control of our dreams, and we will know where we are, know what we're doing, and we will be able to experience that which is called astral projection. So very simply, we're going to talk more in the course about astral projection, but what we can say is the first thing we need to do in astral projection when we want to do this is to relax. Normally, people go to bed or lay down and they say they're very tired and they go straight to sleep, or they are so tired they can't sleep. They're so worried, stressed out with stuff from the day that they can't sleep. So that means we need to relax. And the relaxation that we would do needs to be conscious. In other words, we don't just lay there and listen to the radio or watch television or some kind of social media. What we're going to do instead is consciously relax the physical body, like we have been doing in the practices so far, piece by piece of the physical body, so that we feel it relax and we are conscious of it relaxing rather than just suddenly being asleep. So the relaxation is a process within itself. And suddenly we become much more uh, aware of our physical body in all its places, all the movements of the breathing and everything else, because we are relaxed. And we are no longer stressed out as we were in the day. Even if we had a nice walk in the countryside in the day, we still need to relax because physically we've been moving around. And then we need to focus. So that free essence, that free active consciousness we mentioned earlier, is the part of us who is going to do this practice. So to enable us to do that, we need to focus it. We're going to focus using our consciousness on one particular thing. And yes, you can say this is the same as concentration. And in future talks, we will discuss how to do concentration and the difference between concentration and meditation. But we need to go through concentration to achieve meditation. So it's a valid thing. Concentration is a real thing which we need to use and follow. but to focus is the first thing we need to do here in this practice. So what is recommended by the Gnostic masters is to focus on the heart. Okay? Why? Because the heart, we don't need to worry about, we don't need to turn it off. We don't need to get it tuned in. We just focus on it. It's a natural thing inside us. We just need to focus on the heart and have that concentration on one thing. The concentration on one thing is very important because it's no point focusing on the heart, concentrating on the heart, and then thinking about getting the theatre tickets, or worried about did we close the fridge door, or do we leave the door open to let the dog out. All those things are not concentration. Just one thing, in this case, the heart. That's what we're trying to do, to focus and then concentrate on the heart. If you don't like focusing on the heart, you can choose anything. Could be a beautiful place in the country, or it could be, a waterfall, or it could be, the Egyptian pyramids. You can choose whatever you want to concentrate on, but it's just one thing you're going to choose, and that's where you'll be in the practice. It's not about thinking about other things at the same time. You're going to focus, concentrate with the consciousness. The mind is going to be thinking of one thing. And in this moment, we are psychologically awake because the consciousness is active. We've been using, for example, key soul, or self-remembrance, or the observer and the observed. So we are psychologically awake and we are physically awake. Okay. And this is known as the state of vigil. Right. Then we go through a transition, and this transition is between being psychologically awake and being physically awake, into a transition where we are psychologically awake and physically asleep. Our physical body needs to sleep. And that transition we go through happens every time we go to sleep. It's that normally we are not focused, we're not concentrated, therefore we don't notice so many things as we fall asleep, which means the transition, sometimes we may hear or sense or feel certain things which we normally do, but we just don't notice them. But now we are focused and concentrated, so we do notice. For example, there could be noises in the head, clicking sounds. You could feel that the body is expanding or swelling. These are normal processes which happen in the transition between being physically awake and physically asleep. And then we enter into the dream state, the astral projection in the fifth dimension. We talk about dimensions later in the course, where we are psychologically awake and physically asleep. So in those moments, we know we are physically asleep. And some people say, oh yeah, I could look down on my body and my sleeping body was in the bed. And then I departed the room on my astral experiences. That is because the physical body is asleep, but the psychology is now active and conscious within the astral world. That is the basis of astral projection. There's much more to talk about on this topic, which we will talk about during the course in more detail. But for now, is to let you know that if we apply the practices of the observer and the observed, the key soul and self-remembrance during the day, we will also have more success, in this practice we've just described, the astral projection, practice itself, and or we will wake up in our dreams. Psychologically, we will see, for example, the purple dog we mentioned earlier, we'll see the purple dog and we go, purple dog? You don't get purple dogs in, it's not a real thing. We must be in the astral. You must be in the astral. And so therefore we awaken in the dream. And when we are awake in the dream, when we are awake in the dream world, we can choose to go anywhere we want to go because time doesn't exist there. Time doesn't exist in as a law, you could use that word, within the astral. And so therefore we could go and see Stonehenge when it was being built, or we could go to the pyramids when that was being constructed, or we could go, to a place we went to yesterday morning. Or some people choose to spend time in their own house testing. So if we're in the astral, if we write a message to ourselves with paper and pen, will we find it in the morning? Or um, in the astral, we could move something. Say we go to the kitchen and we put just deliberately put an object from the kitchen, like a spoon, in the oven just to see. Don't turn the oven on, just to put it in there, and then to see whether or not that spoon is in there in the morning. That is a way in which we can start to test where we are and what we are doing in this world of the astral. And it's important to be aware in the astral because in that place we have the opportunity to receive teachings in Gnostic schools, uh, Gnostic temples, and in those places, Gnostic masters will give us orientation and guidance. But for us, not necessarily generalized information. It will be objective information just for us, for our own, what we call inner work. Anyway, all of these things we will talk about more in future lectures here in this course. Thank you very much. I'm now going to stop sharing and stop the recording.